Hello, gamers. You know what time it is. It's fleet time. Today, it's 14th Battle Group. Everyone loves 14th Battle Group, after all. It's everyone's favorite gimmick. As evidenced by the 1,000,001 mods that come up with their own unique variants of existing ships. If not just outright, make more 14th variants. But you'll notice I don't have any frigates, which because unfortunately, the 14th Battle Group doesn't have any frigate variants, which is very sad. I mean, why not make a 14th Battle Group Brawler? It's already got 1,000,001 other variants. I mean, seriously, that thing has way too many variants compared to any other ship. Why, at this point, might as well throw in a 14th Battle Group variant. Not that I would use it, because the Brawler is pretty bad. Outside of a couple of its variants are pretty good, but the baseline Brawler is not very good, and I'm not sure making a 14th Battle Group would fix it. But it would be better, that's for sure. Well, anyways, normally, not having any frigates would be pretty bad, because it'd mean the fight over the capture points is a foregone conclusion. You're not going to get them, and that means you're not going to deploy your full fleet, and that's going to make things a lot harder. But electronic warfare is so good at capturing the points that eagles are actually fast enough to do it. Even if the enemy gets there first, it's an eagle. So even if the enemy gets there first with like a lumen, the eagle's going to push off the lumen, because of course it is. A cruiser's going to beat a frigate, and then it'll capture the point back in like 2 seconds. So it's pretty consistently able to actually capture the points, even without any frigates, which is probably why electronic warfare is getting nerfed. I know, it's very sad. Alexa, play Despacito. This is just so sad. It's not getting nerfed heavily, it's just the range is getting cut in half, so it still has that like 5 times capture speed, but instead of 1,000 range, you have 500 range for capturing the points. Which is probably fair. These things are a little ridiculous. So hopefully in the next patch, you won't be able to skip frigates and just do it with eagles, but we'll see. We'll see. And even then, I think this fleet would be better with some frigates, like maybe trade out a couple of these eagles for Hyperions. That would be pretty good, I think, because the eagles can struggle a little bit. Actually, most of the ships in this fleet can struggle a little bit with actually killing enemy frigates. And so having some Hyperions to not only capture the points, but also just wipe out enemy frigates with superior firepower would be really nice. It would be really nice, and I think overall the fleet would be better if I did that. But for the sake of the gimmick, we're just not going to run any frigates. We're just going to run eagles. I mean, what else do you really need? Yeah, forget the part where I said it would be better if we had frigates. Just pretend I didn't say that. 14th Battle Group is clearly the best thing ever, and that's all we're going to need. Now, this eagle build has largely been inspired by some back and forth on the forums, because someone asked, like, hey, is the eagle actually any good? Is it viable in the land game? And the answer is yes, absolutely. You've just got to get the right build, and in this case, I think I've got a pretty good one. I've tried a bunch of different weapons in the ballistic slots, and I've come to the conclusion that heavy autocannon is really the best choice. Like, you could go heavy needler, and that sounds nice with the extra kinetic DPS and extra efficiency, but you're paying a lot more ordnance points and getting lower range. The Arbalest, on the other hand, doesn't have enough DPS. I've tried hypervelocity drivers, which have great range, but again, they just don't have enough DPS. And so by the end of the battle, like, the eagle's not really doing a whole lot. Like, it's safe because it's firing from a long range, but it's not actually killing a whole lot of enemies. So, like, at that point, why bother? Why not just drop 2 eagles and bring another capital? So if you really want to bring an eagle that's actually pulling its weight, heavy autocannon seems like the sweet spot, where it's got better range than heavy needlers, but also a lot better DPS than hypervelocity drivers. And at the same time, it's cheaper than all of those options, so you can afford more capacitors and make it more durable. But then, of course, the problem you run into is, if I'm using all of my ballistics for kinetics, how do I actually finish off the enemy ship? How do I do some of that armor and hull damage? And that's where the phase lances come in, because you've got other options like mining blaster or heavy blaster. The problem is they don't really have enough range. Phase lances the baseline doesn't have enough range either. But because they're a beam, you can get advanced optics, and that extra 200 range gives them just enough juice, just enough, you can squeeze out just enough juice where they can actually reach their target. Now, they're still shorter range than the heavy autocannons, but an aggressive officer is going to close the distance when possible. So that's not too much of an issue. What can be an issue is if you try to run triple phase lance, because sometimes the enemy is going to be at a distance where you're shooting at them with heavy autocannons, but they're still outside of phase lance range. And at that point, they can very easily just drop their shields and tank all of the kinetics on their hull, which you don't want them to do. That's why instead of a third phase lance, I've got an ion beam. It forces them, when they're in that intermediate range, it forces them to keep their shield up. Plus it's got that shield piercing quality, and if you get 3 or 4 eagles all shooting at the same target, they can stun lock it essentially. So while overall I have put the ion beam as like a C tier weapon, I think in this case it is worth using. It's specifically worth using in this situation, even though I do wish its flux cost would come down, but alas. Now, the phase lances are very good against anti-armor and hull, but they're a lot better at punching down against smaller targets. Against enemy cruisers and capitals, you want a little more oomph. You want a little more gumption, if you know what I'm saying. A little more sauce, if you will. That's why we've got Reapers with a missile autoloader. Sometimes all it takes is one well-placed Reaper to force the enemy to overload, and then you can finish off with the phase lances afterwards. As always, Reapers are a bit of a crapshoot when in AI hands, but missile autoloader, 2 Reapers, that adds up to 10 per eagle. And with 6 of them, that's 60 Reapers. If you toss a coin enough times, you're guaranteed to get some heads. Like if you're only firing 4 Reapers per battle, you could just get unlucky and all the miss. If you're firing 60, chances are you're going to get some very, very juicy hits. And that seems to be true. That's pretty consistent. So besides that, it's pretty straightforward. So, that's the weapons package. After that, then you want to look at the defenses. And for this case, I found S-modding extended shields makes a big difference. Because S-modding extended shields, what'll happen is, if you don't have this, it might be 1v1ing an enemy cruiser, and it's winning, but then a little lumen will flicker up behind it, like the little bastard that it is. And it's got no serious weapons. It's got like a swarmer and an ion cannon. But the problem is that ion cannon is going to disable your engines. So the Eagle's stuck in an awkward spot where now either it just lets its engines get disabled and now it's screwed, or it has to turn to keep its shield arc covering both the enemy cruiser and the lumen, which is a big problem when your main source of hard flux damage is in a hard point. If these were turrets, it wouldn't be such an issue, but the fact that they're in a hard point, that's a big issue. If you give it extended shields, the AI is just going to completely ignore the lumen because it can't do anything. You're totally covered. It just completely ignores it, and it'll just kill the enemy cruiser before turning on the lumen. And I find that makes them a lot more reliable. Now, maybe this wouldn't be much of an issue, again, going back to the Hyperion idea, if I had some hunter-killers that could wipe out the enemy frigates on their own, maybe that wouldn't be such an issue, because then there just wouldn't be as many enemy frigates would be cleared out a lot easier, and I wouldn't have to worry about getting surrounded. But so in a different fleet composition, this might not be necessary. Haven't tested it that far. But for the purposes of this video, it's pretty much essential. It makes a very big difference in how reliable they are. And yeah, beyond that, you get hardened shields, max out capacitors, and one of the rare cases where elite field modulation, compared to the other elite options, that's the one. It's better than elite ordnance expertise. Elite combat endurance is not going to save this thing if it overloads, which it really shouldn't in the first place. This should not be taking significant hull damage. And if it is taking significant hull damage, then it wouldn't if it had elite field modulation in the first place. So, yeah. You got elite helmsmanship to max out to get as much speed as possible, plus gunnery implants. I was originally going to do ballistic mastery because 10% extra damage for your heavy autocannon sounds nice, but gunnery implants does have the upside of also applying to your phase lances, and then the reduced recoil is still pretty useful, because heavy autocannons have a lot of recoil, and even in a hard point, it's noticeable. So getting a little more recoil reduction is nice. Overall, I feel pretty good about this one. And then the Legion. And where I was saying for the Eagle, hypervelocity drivers don't have enough DPS, I've tried a bunch of different things in the medium slots on this, and yeah, it really is just the hypervelocity driver. It's kind of the only game in town. I've tried heavy machine guns, I've tried heavy autocannons. Nothing else really seems to have enough range. Because unlike the Eagle, which has got maneuvering jets and a decent amount of speed, so it can close the distance and start doing damage, this thing, it can't really do that a lot of the time. Like, even if it wants to burn drive forward, it's putting itself in a pretty vulnerable position. So it chooses not to, which is reasonable. But then a lot of the time, its weapons just don't have enough range to actually shoot the enemy. So hypervelocity drivers are the way to go. Now, I do try to squeeze as much DPS as I can out of them with ballistic mastery, but also, something that I don't pick very often, S-modded armored weapon mounts. Because normally, like, why increase the rate of fire by 10% when you could just choose a weapon that has higher DPS in the first place? Normally, that's the thought process. But in this case, there isn't really any other options. The other ones just don't have enough range. They're despite having much higher DPS on paper, they end up doing way less damage overall by the end of the battle. Like, across the board. Shield damage, armor damage, hull damage. The other kinetics just do worse in every category compared to the hypervelocity drivers. And that's on top of the fact that they have EMP damage. So the range, it seems to be very much essential for the Legion. But since we've got a little extra flux to spare, we can squeeze out a little more DPS by S-monning the weapon mounts here. Now, some people have said that Hurricanes are not that good anymore. I've heard people say that. I put them in A tier in my missile tier list. But some people are saying, no, after they got nerfed, they're not good anymore. Hopefully, this video will change your mind, because I've been playing around with them. Look, you want to put them linked. Right? Don't put a single Hurricane. Not very good. You want to have at least 2 of them linked together. And hopefully this video will demonstrate they are actually really good. Even against remnants, which mostly focus on shields, these things can overload enemy ships from long range, because they try to block them with their shields, even when they're on high flux. Then they're going to overload and take a bunch of damage. It is pretty great. I've tested also both. I did a hull tanking version and an armor tanking version of this. You don't really have enough ordnance points to do both. You don't have enough skills to do both. Like, I did one with damage control and elite combat endurance and swapped this for reinforced bulkheads and all of that. Between the two, it seems like armor tanking does a little better. Maybe that's because the 14th variant gets a little, 100 extra armor, but it doesn't get any extra hull, so it kind of leans into that favor a little more. But overall, it seems to do better. And normally, I don't like the maneuverability penalty here, but yeah, it just needs the extra ordnance points. There's not really much else to say. Like, it needs that extra juice. So I'm willing to take that 25%. I've got helmsmanship to help compensate for it. So it's going to be all right. It's going to be okay. It has, even with the heavy armor and the 14th battle group, it has a little more maneuverability than the baseline. Not a lot, but a little more. I did the math. It's about 110%, right? With the baseline being 100%. So I should just say a 10% over the baseline, but that's the way it is. Hurricanes still good. That's the point I'm making. When it comes to fighters, I really, really like this setup. It just gives you a really solid bang for your buck. Like, you could spend more ordnance points on more expensive fighters and get more value out of them. That's true. And for a pure carrier, that would be a pretty good option. But the Legion is a battle carrier, so every point you're spending on those fighters is subtracting from its direct combat capabilities. And what I really like about this setup in particular is the cost-effectiveness ratio seems to be really good, because Talons, with their Swarmers and Vulcans, are pretty good damage against lighter targets. They're very good at finishing off frigates and even destroyers to a degree. Now, I wouldn't do all Talons. I think that's going a bit too far, but that's why I throw in Gladius to bring some kinetic damage for breaking through shields. And then they also bring flares to help the survivability of the group. So double Talon plus Gladius, that's kind of a good kill squad. But the problem is against heavier targets like cruisers, they're not going to do a whole lot. And that's where the claws come in. They might not be able to kill a cruiser, but they can at least start disabling it with those EMP damage. And that's kind of where it all balances out. It's able to kill smaller targets, and against heavier targets they can't kill, they can at least disable them. And all of that for a very, very cheap ordnance point cost compared to other fighter setups. So I end up coming to this one a lot. If you really like emphasizing the carrier part of the battle carrier, you might want something more expensive. But I think it's usually better to emphasize the actual direct combat capabilities of the Legion, and instead go for the cheapest you can get and getting the maximum benefit from the fighters. And this setup is the one that I like for that. Yeah, there's not much to say there. And then we get to the flagship, which is, we're doing the meme. We're doing Shield Shunt. And the reason for that is because the skills that I wanted to pick for this, I can't really go into industry, which means I don't get ordnance expertise. And by God, an Onslaught without ordnance expertise does not need a shield, because at that point you're generating so much soft flux, you can't block anything. Your shield is basically useless. If you have ordnance expertise, I wouldn't go Shield Shunt, because then you actually have enough dissipation to fire your guns. And then, yeah, you're still going to build up a decent amount of soft flux, but having that shield to block things like Tachyon lances is more valuable than the extra armor you get from Shield Shunt. But in this case, without that ordnance expertise, we just do not have enough flux to actually have decent weapons and a shield. So I actually think Shield Shunt's a good choice here. I think if you're missing out on ordnance expertise, which normally you wouldn't, but if you are, then Shield Shunt is going to be your best friend here, which results in a very impressive 3,050 armor. I mean, it's a big number. It's pretty cool. And then, of course, we've got S-modded magazines, which is great for the thermal pulse cannons, and then triple Storm Needler, because, I mean, they've got 1,000 kinetic DPS at 0.7 efficiency. So, yeah, they've got bad range and bad hit strength, and they're expensive. But the sheer DPS and the efficiency is complete. Both the efficiency, unmatched. It is the best efficiency out of any large kinetic weapon, and the best DPS out of any large kinetic weapon. And it's not even close. Just burn drive towards the enemy Radiant, angle yourself a little bit so that this one on the side and this one can converge, and you're just doing 4,000 damage a second to its shield. As simple as that. Then the problem, of course, is you don't have a whole lot to work with for anti-armor, which is why we've got heavy maulers, because when it comes to medium-high explosives for ballistics, it's kind of the best choice you've got. Heavy mortar's just not very good. Mining Blaster has even less range. You could run a Mining Blaster, and that'd be kind of cool, but it has even less range than the Storm Needler, and you would need to get Ballistic Rangefinder to fix that. It's a little too much, it's not, we don't have enough ordnance points for that. So you end up going on with Heavy Mauler. And then when it comes to the missile slots, Jackhammers are pretty good. I've linked 4 of them together. Because compared to Typhoons, Typhoons get shot down a lot more. That's been my experience. Typhoons get shot down a lot more, where the Jackhammers, even if the enemy Radiant is bringing a Paladin, if you've got 12 hammers coming at you, they're going to hit you. The main thing you need to worry about is, you're going to save these for the enemy Radiant, obviously, but the main thing you need to worry about is it will try to dodge them with its Phase Skimmer. So if you're rolling up with your Radiant to kill you're rolling up with your Onslaught to kill the enemy Radiant, you've got to wait for it to use its Phase Skimmer charges, because as long as you get it to high enough flux, it'll start to panic, and it'll start using them, And then where you use your burn drive to stick to it as it retreats, and after it uses that third and final charge, that's when you can nail it with a volley. And that's when it's going to overload, and it's just a sitting duck. So for only 6 ordnance points each, they provide a decent amount of value. Like sometimes they end up doing, like the jackhammers do end up out-damaging everything else purely in terms of hull damage. Obviously, they're not going to out-damage everything else in any other category, but the hull damage, sometimes they strictly do the most just by landing a clean shot on an enemy capital ship. Which might make you think that I would want missile specialization, but as long as you're careful with your shot, as long as you place it correctly, you should be fine. You're not going to need the extra ammo. Instead, stacking up impact mitigation for the, which is obvious for the armor, because we're completely reliant on armor here, and you're going to want helmsmanship so that you're not a turtle. Then you're going to want point defense, because the Radiant Remnants love to bring lots of missiles, lots of breach missiles especially, and we really don't want any of those things touching us. Missiles are the biggest thing that are going to strip off your armor, so getting that elite point defense, the extra damage and extra range, is pretty much essential. Like, hopefully you'll see that during the battle as waves of flash bombers come rolling in and get completely annihilated before they even get to touch us. Target analysis is kind of mandatory. You're not going to do, you're not getting very far without this in a capital v capital situation. I've opted to skip ballistic mastery in favor of combat endurance, because ballistic mastery is only going to apply to our ballistic weapons, but then the thermal pulse cannons count as energy, and then we've got missiles as well. We've got a little bit of everything, actually. Whereas combat endurance gives us 5% extra damage by maxing out our combat readiness, but also 5% reduced damage taken, and also the elite bonus giving us that repair gives us a nice safety net after our armor runs out. So that's why I picked that. Yeah, that really covers everything. Normally I'd like to have a fleet with like a little more going on, but in this case, just for the sake of committing to the bit, unfortunately it's gotten a little simple. But if you were to make a more complicated fleet, I would say it does seem like a good ratio between like eagles and capital ships is like, well, excluding the player flagship, but looking at like these 2 legions, I'd say for each of them, having 2 eagles to support them feels really good. Because some people were, again, going back to the origin of the build, some people were questioning, like, are eagles even viable late game? Like, why would you take them over just bringing another capital ship? And I feel like I wouldn't go pure eagles, but I think I wouldn't go pure capitals either. In an ideal scenario, having 2 legions and 4 eagles feels about right for the main battle line. I guess they kind of, like, they're a little bit different in what they're good at. Like, the legions are going to have a hard time backing up, so if they get pinned down, you have to go support them. But the thing is, legions are a little slow, so they often have a hard time supporting each other. Whereas the eagles, they're not going to be able to stand their ground the way that a legion can, but because they're a lot faster, they can get themselves out of trouble and go support other ships. And so having a mix of the 2 feels a little better than just going one or the other. And then, of course, I would like to have like some Hyperions or something instead of going 6 eagles, and that's when you start getting into like a more sophisticated, more balanced approach to a fleet, which is pretty cool. I do like that seems to be better than just running a mono fleet. In fact, even the highest DPS fleet that someone has made with missile spam isn't really just like one ship. It's got like a mix of conquests and griffins, with then a couple of LP brawlers to like capture the points and catch any frigates that try to escape the encirclement, and then also the flagship is like a doom. So you end up with there's like a decent mix of, like, even in the sort of hyper optimized fleet, there's like a decent mix of different ships. And I'm finding that in something that's not as hyper optimized for fastest kill time, having a good mix of tactics between different ships that specialize into different things does actually seem to be a good idea, which is nice, because a lot of the time, you see video games that are, But they try to come up with combat systems that are like unique and interesting, and instead just spamming one thing ends up being like the optimal strategy, and Star Sector doesn't seem to have that issue. So that's a nice little thing. They've done a good job with that. Alright, let's go. Let's go like Mario. And 226, we got 3 Alpha Core Radiants. Let's have fun. All we need to do is send you guys off to capture those and burn forward. What have we got that they have not? Big, big guns, my friend. This reminds me of the old days in the hegemony. Yeah, see, the Lumens got there first because, of course they did. So they're going to capture the points, but that's fine. They're going to run away as soon as 2 Eagles come charging at them, and then it only takes 2 seconds for them to capture the points. Well, there goes my frame rate. What's that all about? See? There we go. Can already deploy them. Flash bombers deleted. So you don't need to super worry about fighting over the capture points, but I guess I'll leave those for now. Mainly want to try and do some damage to the enemy fleet, but we've got to stick. But at the same time, we've got to be constantly aware of the Radiant's position because we need to be ready. The last thing we want is the Radiant trying to 1v1 something like the Legion here, because that would be bad for the Legion's health. So here we angle ourselves a little bit. You can see the hammers coming in. Oh wow, one of them actually got through. Impressive. But you can see we angle ourselves a little bit. Yeah, no, those are not getting through. Not even close. To try and get 2 Storm Needlers on target at the same time. To really just burn through its shields. It's not too heavily supported, because the key thing about Radiants is that they're really difficult to kill when they're surrounded by a lot of allies that they can you know, squirm away like a little rat, like a centipede. But they don't have a whole lot of support right now, so we can get a little aggressive here. Just ideally not by ourselves, because this is going to strip off a lot of our armor, and I don't want it to do that this early in the fight. You see, it started using its phase skimmer. Now we can fire our volley. We got an overload. And it's dead. Simple as that. Now this guy is in a really annoying position. Luckily, pulse lasers are not going to have great hit strength against the armor on this thing. It's still intact. Like, maybe if that had some heavy blasters, it'd be a little more threatening, but not in this case. The most annoying ones are obviously the safety override ones, because they just, as soon as they're threatened, they just run away to the edge of the map. And there's nothing in this fleet that can really catch them, so you just kind of let them get away. Oh, look. See that? That's pretty nice. And another advantage of hypervelocity drivers is they just snipe frigates. No need for any other weapons. They just, if you got elite ballistic mastery, the projectile speed is fast enough that they can do it on their own. Let's see, how are you guys doing? Yeah, it's safety overrides, but you're winning, because of course you are. Good build. See, this is a case where the fleet tactics are not great, but it doesn't matter because the builds are really good. Or brute forcing it. death. I want to watch, but at the same time, I don't want to leave my Onslaught on autopilot. Yeah, that's the thing. These things, you really can't pin these down. They're very annoying. Even if I try to get both of them to chase it, they're going to chase it all the way to the edge of the map, aren't they? Maybe if one of them can get a lucky overload, that'd be different. Isn't that nice? See, look at that. When it does close the distance, it does become very dangerous. Safety overrides. Well, not that it's actually all that strong, but they're just annoying because it's like, this is like the one remnant ship. Well, there you go. Look at that. You got it. Apexes are like the one remnant ship that love to run away, and then you give them safety overrides, and it makes them really good at it. I guess frigates love to run away too, but, you know, they're fragile enough that you can just kill them. Yeah, everyone's still intact. Yeah, don't want to be... Yeah, don't want to be getting hit by that. Because they can survive being shot at by a Radiant, but not for a long period of time. And look at that. Almost finished it off. Let me just do that for you, buddy. There you go. Yeah, Tachyon Lances are the big worry. Really, it's a good thing it's not running at me right now, because that would be really annoying. Even though it is taking pot shots at me. Alright, so if you guys could, like, kill that real quick, that'd be great. So, let's try and put in a void order here. Because I would love to jump this thing, but the other Radiant is coming in right now. And I want to get through this without any losses. So, you're going to need to avoid that. Alright, there's one. I know I'm being shot at from the side, but I'll be fine. It's just venting. Okay. Sure. You can do that. That is an option. Yeah. You can absolutely do that. There is nothing stopping you. So I think with a little bit of a tune-up, maybe probably a different flagship, because, again, the Onslaught really wants that Ordnance expertise. But if I choose a different flagship that doesn't need Ordnance expertise and switch out some of the Eagles for maybe some Hyperion. Yeah, maybe like switch out the Onslaught for a Pegasus to use up the 10 extra DP I would get from some Hyperions or something. I think that this could push up to 500% XP, just like the high-tech fleet did, with a little bit of a better strategy. Okay, hold on. You are in a little bit of an awkward spot there. But yeah, I think with a better strategy, these builds could push up to 500% bonus XP. Nice. And I'm actually going to show detailed combat results. We're going to scroll through them. Yeah, I didn't actually pick up all of those. Sometimes it can be annoying trying to actually grab everything. Alright, let's see. Wow. It did slightly more damage than my Onslaught. I don't know if that speaks badly to my piloting, or if it speaks well to the loadout, but yeah. And Look at that, 34,000. It even did 20,000 shield damage, which is not bad. It's better than the fighters are doing. Obviously, most of it's coming from the hypervelocity driver, and you look at that hull damage. Yeah, when I tried switching some of them over to other weapons, they did less shield damage and less hull damage. It just made the ship worse overall. Because with the numbers, it can be a bit finicky. Right? If it just does more shield damage, that's not necessarily a good thing, because it could mean that it's doing a bunch of damage, then the enemy's backing up and venting, and then it's fighting it over and over again. That'll rack up a lot of shield damage, but it's actually doing worse because it's not killing the enemy. The fact that it does not only more shield damage, but more hull damage than other options, I think is very telling that this is the way to go. But yeah, like look at that. This Legion did really good. This one did less good, but still pretty good. So look at those numbers. 33% for the Hurricanes, 54% for the drivers. And then these guys, I mean, like I was talking about, they do damage. They're fairly safe. They got enough durability. They got that 360 shield. And unless you let them get jumped by a capital ship, they can survive. Let's see, Reaper. This Reaper did 10,000 hull damage on this one with 3 hits. Nice. And then there's the Phase Lance doing 15,000 hull. And then the autocannon doing most of the shield damage there. Oh, that does remind me. There's one thing I forgot to talk about with the Eagle build, which is the mining lasers. I did rate these D tier, but honestly, I think I was too harsh. I would push them up to C tier. Partly because there are some ships where they can actually shoot things down. Like on the Champion, there's those side energy slots that people usually leave empty. If you put mining lasers there and in the back slots, they can actually shoot down salamanders with just, you just put 4 mining lasers at the back and sides, and they can shoot down salamanders. So the cost effectiveness there is pretty good. You're spending 4 ordnance points to keep the engine safe from salamanders. But on top of that, there's EMP arcs, which is especially relevant when this thing has no defense against EMP. It is completely vulnerable to EMP. Any ion arcs that pierce the shields are doing full damage. And for that, they target randomly. The EMP arcs target either the weapons or the engines, and they pick randomly. But importantly, they don't target empty slots. Which means that if you fill all of your small slots with mining lasers, then you're paying 1 ordnance point to reduce the chance that an EMP arc actually hits something important. Because now you've got 5. You basically, if an EMP arc pierces the shields, but it hits one of these mining lasers, it didn't really do anything. It basically had no impact. Versus if it hits the engines, that would be a pretty big deal. That would be a problem. So it's not a perfect defense, but it's like 5 ordnance points. They can shoot down like a few. Sometimes they shoot down like a harpoon or 2. Sometimes they deflect an EMP arc. So it's not a whole lot going on there. But it's enough that I think for 5 ordnance points, it's worth the investment. Let's see, this guy took a little damage. Yeah, you just got to get a new fresh coat of paint. You'll be all right. Yeah, we'll go back to the damage numbers. Let's see if there's any insights to be had here. Let's see, Jackhammer, 19,000 hull damage. Yeah, got some pretty clean shots with those. You just gotta wait. You gotta be patient. You gotta wait for it to use its face skimmer so that it can't dodge, and then you slam them. Although, of course, the Hurricanes did more, but they're large missiles and they are still good. Fight me. I will fight over that. Let's see. Then we've got the Heavy Maulers doing 12,000, and they're going to do the most armor damage out of any option here. Then TPC's doing the most hull damage. They do good armor. They kind of do good across the board, and then all of the shield damage coming from the Storm Needlers. Yeah, so that's that. Now the damage taken is going to be pretty low because it's not taking into account the damage reduction from armor here. So you could, if the damage that came in was 10,000, but that 10,000 got reduced was low hit strength, so it got reduced by 95% by the armor, then it would only count the damage after the reduction for the purposes of damage received here. So it says 5%, but I actually tanked a lot more damage than that. It's just, it's not factored into this. see. And yeah, you can see here, Hypervelocity Driver, 12,000 EMP, the Claws, 4,000. The Gladius, 6,000 shield damage. It's going to do most shield damage, but then the Talons are going to do more armor and hull damage. So not a whole lot, but it's a nice little support, and a lot of the time, fighters can end up blocking enemy shots, which is really nice. It's weird because on paper, fighters never do a lot of damage. But you can really feel the difference when you have fighters and when you don't. Especially when you're just swarming the battlefield. Like if you have like 5 legions and you're swarming the battlefield with these things, you can really feel the difference it makes. Just because there's so many fighters on the field that they're blocking a lot of enemy shots. On top of the fact that they're doing a little bit of damage themselves. Let's see, Unknown Energy, 5,000 EMP damage. Are you sure? Are you sure that wasn't the Ion Beam? That seems a bit weird. Okay. So yeah, most of the hull damage is going to be Phase Lance. The Reapers did 8,000 damage. I really think that for a missile autoloader here, the breach missiles are good if you're doing like auto lance builds, but I don't think auto lance builds are that good. They're pretty good on the Falcon, but for the Eagle, I think Phase Lance seems better. And then if you're going to get into Phase Lance range, you might as well use Reapers. You can see here, if that shield hit could have been an overload. So that's something to take into account, is it doesn't, like, hitting the shield is only going to clock in like 1,000 shield damage. But if that 1,000 shield damage was an overload, then that means that it opens the floodgates for your Phase Lances to finish the job. So they're actually a little more valuable than they even show here on paper. Let's see, yeah, those numbers look good. And look at those numbers, there's a whole lot of numbers. This one didn't even take any hull damage. Did the other one take hull damage? Nope. Just shield and armor damage. That didn't even get to the hull. Clean. This one took 8 armor damage. 5 armor damage. Yeah, the shield tanking is going well. Let's see. Reaper, yeah, you hit 1 on the shield. Reaper, you hit 1 on the hull. You actually managed to do hull damage without doing any armor damage. That's kind of impressive. And obviously that means you hit a spot that was already stripped, but still, it's pretty unusual. And then 1 against the shield. Yeah, 2 hits. 1 on hull, 1 on shield. And these two that do the least damage are going to be the ones that don't start deployed. These are the ones that you have to wait for the capture points first. Usually. That's why they end up doing less damage than the others. Yeah, you look at that hull damage. This is the most important metric usually, because that means that's how much stuff it's actually killing. You know, most of the time, obviously, there is exceptions. And if you look across the board, they're doing some pretty good numbers. They are putting up some pretty good numbers. Well, anyways, yeah, that's about it. See ya.